Hello BookTube, this is Weekly Reads. I'm going to save the manga I read this week for the end of this video. So I'm going to start with the book that I had hoped to spend most of the reading week with, and that was In the Shadow of the Empress by Nancy Goldstone. This is a history of 18th century Europe with a special focus on Empress Maria Theresa and her daughters, one of whom is Marie Antoinette. I'm not entirely sure why I decided to go with that plan of spending Sunday and the work week with this book. Over the course of this reading week, I did haul two books that I wanted to read as soon as I got them in, which I did, although one of them was the day after I got it because UPS. But anyway, so that was one issue this book faced. The other issue was that on Sunday I went with my mother to watch The Four Children of the Apocalypse and The Demon Toddler, my nieces and nephews, for a few hours. And that's never quite conducive to reading, especially when the living room has to be dark. But anyway, so ultimately I did decide to put this book aside, and I'll come back to it at some point in the future. Now, as far as I got into the book, the introduction is fairly terrible. I really didn't like it. And the book itself, it's okay. I'm still not entirely sure if Goldstone style necessarily gels with me all that well. I think another look at both In the Shadow of the Empress and Four Queens probably is warranted at some point in the future. I'm just not entirely sure when that will be. On Monday, I read By Stone and Needle by Catherine W. Carter. This is her current collection of poetry. Catherine W. Carter is one of my favorite poets, and this collection is quite good. It is not one of my favorites, though. I think my favorite collection of Carter's is Larvae of the Nearest Stars, her third collection. The poems in By Stone and Needle are focused on nature and are inspired by pagan, neo-pagan witchcraft. And Carter uses poetic forms that are inspired by Old English poetry. There are quite a few poems in this collection that I quite liked, although I think probably a reread or two will probably improve things, I would suspect. But expect to see some Poetry Thursday videos of poems in this collection in the near future. And then on Tuesday, I had a look at Homeland of My Body, New and Selected Poems by Richard Blanco. This is his most recent collection. And I decided to give it a go on Tuesday because the book I had wanted to read on Tuesday came in later in the afternoon and was also misdelivered. I really need to get on to UPS about that. But anyway, so I read, so the collection is sort of the new poems book in the collection. There are some new poems at the beginning and some new poems at the end. And then the collection goes from in chronological order from his earliest collection to his most recent one up to this collection. And then there are some new poems at the very end. So I read the first batch of new poems and his first collection, and I'm not much of a fan of Richard Blanco's work. There are some poems I quite liked, particularly America, but a lot of the rest of them didn't really do much for me. But again, I will probably come back to this collection at some point in the future. I just don't know when. Now, on to the manga. So, my plan for this week was to start the reading week reading 6 more volumes of Twin Star Exorcists by Yoshiaki Sukeno, starting with volume 28 and ending with volume 33, which will get me caught up for when I get volume 34, which I think has already been released, but I will not be getting it until early August. Twin Star Exorcists is about 2 prodigy super exorcists, Rokuro and Benio. Their superiors in the Exorcist Association inform them that they are the prophesied Twin Star Exorcists. Again, super exorcists who are fated to marry and have an even more super prophesied child exorcist baby. The problem is, at the beginning, that Rokuro survived a traumatic incident sometime before the series began, and this soured him on being an exorcist. He wants nothing to do with being an exorcist. Benio is similarly traumatized. Her parents were killed by a nascent monster called a Basara, who becomes, or a monster called a Kigare, who becomes a more evolved form called a Basara named Kamui. And so they're both traumatized in various ways, and it takes quite some time for Rokuro to want to become an exorcist again. That the reason why he wants to be an exorcist is to protect people, and for him and Benio to warm up to each other and to gradually fall in love. These volumes sees Rokuro going into Magano, an alternate universe where the Kagare live, in search of Benio, who has left the primary world after a attack on an island nation called Tsuchimikado Island that is controlled by the Exorcists. And Rokuro discovers a lot about himself, about what it means to be a Twin Star Exorcist, and a whole lot of other stuff happens that leads to the final battles, which take part a lot of the these volumes. So there's not much I can tell you because that would be spoilers. What I can tell you is that these volumes were amazing. I loved them. There was a death in these volumes that I did not expect to move me as much as it did. I was in tears. I also really enjoyed the coming together of the Exorcists and some of the Basara that really highlights one of the themes of this series, which is overcoming generational trauma and hatred. And it was so good, and I'm just really looking forward to the next 2 volumes, which will wrap up the series. Twin Star Exorcist has become one of my favorite series. Really looking forward to it. On Wednesday, I read Volume 2 of Still Ball Run, which is part of the 7th part of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure by Yoshiaki. Hirohiko Araki. So, Still Ball Run is set in 1890s America and is about a cross-continental race starting in San Diego and terminating in New York City with a prize of $50 million to the winner. I thought it was $100 million, but it's actually 50. The main character is a young man named Johnny Joestar, who was a jockey who has become crippled. He enters the Still Ball Run race after he sees Gyro Zappelli. So this character here is Johnny. This character here is Gyro. This character here is another racer named Mountain Tim, who becomes an ally of Johnny and Gyro's during the course of these chapters. Gyro has still balls that he can use to spin, and these produces a number of effects. At the same time, a number of racers begin to develop superpowers, stands. And over the course of these chapters, Johnny begins to develop a stand ability. Mountain Tim already has one, and several other characters display what could be described as stand abilities. So these chapters start with the end of the first leg of the race, and Gyro is disqualified due to the use of his still balls, and he and Johnny make a more permanent alliance together, and so they go off on the second leg of the race, which is 750 miles. And in this area, there is a mysterious land which, if you survive it, grants stand abilities, which just so happens to be where Gyro and Johnny end up. Also, there are some murderers in the race who are targeting other racers, and they ultimately target Johnny and Gyro, and Mountain Tim is after them. And at the end, Gyro's past is explored. I really enjoyed these chapters. They were a lot of fun. And while showing too much of Twin Star Exorcists at this point would be very spoilery, I will show some of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Okay. And then on Thursday, I read the third omnibus edition of Xxxholic, which includes chapters 7, 8, and 9 by Clamp. So Xxxholic is the sibling series to Tsubasa Reservoir Chronicle. In Xxxholic, a young man named Kimihiro Watanuki can see and is very attractive to spirits. One day he stumbles upon the shop of the witch Yuko, who promises to grant Watanuki his wish of being free of seeing and having to deal with the supernatural in exchange for work. Yuko is a witch who grants wishes, but in exchange she demands payment. And in Watanuki's case, it's basically he is her maid, chef, errand boy, and chair occasionally. Watanuki's adventures with Yuko also drags in two other of his classmates, Himawari and Domeki, who is a young man who lives at a temple and has some spiritual powers and experience of his own. These volumes were quite a lot of fun. It sees Watanuki sacrificing a part of himself for Domeki's sake, and then beginning to understand the consequences of his actions, and really enriching the relationship between him and Domeki, as well as giving hints that things aren't quite what they appear to be, and that Yuko seems to have ulterior motives. I quite enjoyed these 3 volumes. They were quite a bit of fun. Yeah, quite a bit of fun. So today I also had to go watch The 4 Children of the Apocalypse and the Demon Toddler, so I didn't get anything read today, to my annoyance. So I'll start my reading week up tomorrow. My plan for next week is 6 volumes of Yozakura Family. And then I think I will probably spend the last days of July, reading manga. A few volumes, omnibus volumes of One Piece, and probably a few other volumes as well. And then on Friday, I will probably or on Thursday, I'll do my August reading plan, which is going to be insane. I mean, I'm going to use that video to whittle down what actually my reading plan for August is going to be, but yeah, I'm not entirely sure what it's going to be. But it will, there'll be some manga as well. But anyway, so for sure, I'm going to do 6 volumes of Mission Yozakura Family and some One Piece, and probably some Hunter x Hunter and Dr. Stone, and maybe if I can't work it, The Gray Man. But we shall see, and I will, of course, report back on Friday for next weekly reads. So until then, BookTube, thank you, have a great afternoon, and stay safe.